Hi everyone, I'm glad that you're here with Humans of Authenticity. My name is Vili, your host. Our guest today is Sheri Singer, an award-winning communications PR marketing expert. She is the founder of Association Exchange, a virtual professional development platform for association executives. She is also a volunteer leader with ASAE on countless councils and committees. Welcome to Humans of Authenticity, Sheri.
Thank you so much for having me.
So good to have you. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners first?
Sure. I've worked with the association community for most of my career. I was on staff for the first 12 years. Then I went to work with a big PR agency. And when I started my own communications firm, I came back to the association community. I've had my company for 22 years and we provide marketing communications. My heart and soul is really with the association community. I realized pretty fast that I didn't want to work with small businesses or corporations. So my business is 100% focused on associations. And in addition to that, because that doesn't keep me busy enough, I have 5 different volunteer positions, many of them within the association community, and some of which you mentioned. I'm about to step into the role of, I'm the incoming chair for ASAE Research Foundation's Development Committee. And some people might say, why are you chairing the development committee if you're a Marcom person? And actually, they recruited people with Marcom skills to be on the committee. And I was able to contribute to the committee with drafting messages as a volunteer and writing last year for Giving Tuesday scripts, emails, and texts that people could send to have ASAE members participate in Giving Tuesday. I'm also an ASAE Young Professionals mentor and the founder of AXC. In my fun time, anybody who knows me knows I love the beach and I'll go anywhere where there's a beach. I like to travel. I've traveled to 50 different countries so far, another couple over the next few months this summer and in the fall. I just got back from Portugal in March. And I would say my passion project in my free time is exercise, and I split between walking with a group in my neighborhood and then Pilates.
So among those 50 countries, is there one that you thought you would move in to live one day?
My very first trip was to France and Greece, Paris and a couple of the Greek islands. And I remember stepping off the plane in Greece and literally feeling like I had been there before. And I'd never been there before.
Ah,
So that every time I'm in one of those places, I have a connection. And I'm not sure if it's the sun, the beach, the kind of laid back attitude, but I feel like Sicily, Southern Italy, Greece, Southern Spain, anytime I'm around the Mediterranean, I just feel like, oh, this kind of feels like home. But I will
nice.
tell you that the prettiest 2 countries, without question, were Switzerland and Norway.
Nice. They are on my bucket list. Good to know. I want to unpack a bit of your connection to associations. I'm hearing a very strong passions towards it. What is it about this sector that give you such a strong connections? Well, I mean, not only professional, but also I'm hearing a lot of emotional connections to it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the first time I was in associations, it was like almost a comedy of error how my career kind of started out. I was in signing up for classes. I was with a group of people. They're like, we have to leave. So I signed up for this class, radio, television, film wound up being my major. Then when I got out of school, I thought I was going to be a broadcast journalist. And I'd done a 9-credit internship with a radio station in Frederick, Maryland. And I was like, I really don't like this. And
Wow.
like, what am I going to do? This is what I thought I was going to do. And I still have a passion for that. Obviously, podcasting is kind of a related field with broadcast journalism. But I met someone randomly who said, oh, I just heard from an association person yesterday. You'd be great at association management. And I wound up getting my first job with an association as an assistant editor of a magazine. And then, ironically, how did I expand that to public relations and more Marcom? We were having a meeting in Atlanta, and I said to my boss, can I send out a press release about our meeting? I didn't go to the meeting. I was very junior, obviously right out of college. And when she came back, the meeting was in Atlanta. She said, well, congratulations. The All News radio station was there, CNN, the Atlanta Journal
Wow.
Constitution, off of one press release. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So 3 years into my career, I was director of communications. And I like that role. You had a little bit of the internal, but I really had a passion for the external. I actually joined a PR firm and I did like the agency work. I mean, my company now is very much modeled off of that. I was a senior executive with Ketchum Public Relations, and I liked the environment and I liked the work, but I felt disconnected from the clients.
Mm.
And that's why it was so easy when I started my own firm. I made it about associations. I really created it for associations because, 22 years ago, nobody was doing virtual agencies, right? You had to have a brick and mortar place or you weren't valid.
Yeah.
And I was like, that really doesn't work for associations because they don't need to pay that videographer on the team. They need the videographer when they need the videos, and then we let them go. We don't have to keep him or her on the team. So I kind of felt like the model that I was using was advantageous for associations because I could give them people with 15, 20 years of experience, and that we were able to produce items quicker. So it costs less in the long run. Because if you have somebody who takes 3 hours on a piece, right, and they're charging $100 an hour, that's $300. But I do it and I charge 250, right? And then it's done in 1 hour. So it's the same amount of money, but you're getting, in my opinion, a much higher quality project because you're getting all of my intellectual property and all of my experience within that particular document. So when I structured my business, I realized it was in favor of working with associations. And then, like you said, I have a passion. I understand associations from the ground up because I've served in a lot of different capacities on staff. So it just seemed like a natural fit.
That's really cool. The gig economies really does wonder to association sectors. Like we now have a lot more choices. At the same time, the agency and the service provider also have to get into the association mindset, understanding our model so that they can become more competitive to the market out there. Really cool. Thank you for sharing your stories. Could you share 3 things that you love about yourself during that journey that you just shared with us?
This is always really tough. PR people always joke about this. We're like the shoemaker's children have no shoes because we are great at promoting other people and not necessarily ourselves. I am very enthusiastic about the work that I do and the community that I do it in. I think I bring that enthusiasm, and I also think I bring a lot of passion to my work and to my clients. And then thirdly, I think I'm fun. And I think sometimes that's mistaken for if you're not serious, you don't get it. But I think injecting a little bit of humor into your daily activities is important for everyone because I think laughter kind of helps. Last month was mental health month, and we're dealing with mental health crises. We all know about it. And I feel like humor is one thing that can help fight that.
That's really cool. The other thing I want to unpack about from your stories earlier is you say something about the internal and the external communications, and you say that you prefer one to the other.
Yeah.
Can you share with us a little bit more about that, like the key differences and what drawn you to one side other than the other?
Yes, I can. So first of all, when I worked for Ketchum, the managing director who wound up interviewing all the senior level staff that worked there, he would not hire you if you said that public relations was a people oriented profession, because the real skill for Marcom, for PR, for all of it is really writing.
Mm.
Writing is a very solitary internal kind of process, as we know, because most of us do some kind of writing in our positions. And I feel like I get enough introspection from that skill set part of my work. And then the rest of it, I want to figure out how it betters society, how it helps individual people and then communities. And when you're doing that, it's the external piece of it, right? How does it affect not just your members or your staff, but externally from that? How does it affect elected officials? How does it affect the news cycle? How can you make people aware of your industry so that you are a resource for the news, so that you do appear on Capitol Hill giving testimony? How can you make your industry more relevant? And I would say out of all the things I've done in my career, that is my sweet spot. Helping associations get wider awareness, raising awareness and visibility of the particular industry that they're representing. And I've had a pretty good run at at doing
Gotcha.
those. And it's very satisfying. I was working with a client that had 8 people on the staff. It was in the transportation field. They were trying to get a seat at the table with like American Bus, American Trucking, huge associations with tons of money. And we were able, through a media campaign, through raising awareness among related organizations and et cetera, when a transportation bill came to the table, they were at the table. So it's very
Wow.
satisfying to be able to do that kind of work.
Right. So what I'm hearing is one is the writing help you to connect the message with the audience. And then the external is really connecting the brand with a wider audience and make sure that they expand the reach and then start delivering messages from the new reach.
Yes, it's really interesting. I'll talk about internal in a second. So the symbol for my company is a triangle, it's 3-sided, right? So you educate the public, whatever your audience is, then you change their perceptions. Ultimately, the pinnacle of that triangle is changing behavior. It's a social marketing model, not to be confused with social media. It's why I chose the triangle for my company.
Nice. That's really cool. And it's directly relevant to association sector where we're trying to make an impact in society.
So going back to your second part of the question about internal is really what I consider like publications, your newsletter, your journal, that kind of thing. And when you're doing that, it stays introspective, right? You're going out to the members of the association, but that's not really your external audience. So it stays internally. And I'm a little bit more of an extrovert.
Nice. Thank you for differentiation that for me. Let's get to the keyword discussions. What keywords are we discussing today?
So the key word that we are discussing today is advocate. And I think when we think of the definition of advocate, particularly in association setting, we think about an advocate in terms of government relations or government affairs or public affairs. But I think we need to think of the word advocate in a much broader sense. What is that broader sense? So it's a person who supports like a course of action or a policy. But if we expand that further, we could even say that it's somebody who advocates for their culture, their community, and themselves. So let's talk about advocate in the broadest perspective possible. And that's really culture. And there's a couple different cultures in association. There's the culture of the association community itself that we see through ASAE and through other organizations related to the association community, right? The state societies. I have one at Association Exchange, etc. You have one with your podcast. That's kind of culture. That's in the broadest sense of advocating. So when we're doing all these different things, like you with your podcast, you're advocating for association executives through your podcast. And that's like culture. And then we can see how that directly affects community, right? Because community is the next kind of level down. And community is a little bit closer in than culture, right? Community creates culture, but I'm looking at it from almost concentric circles moving down. So you have culture on the outside, and then the next is community. And community is your coworkers, the members of your association. I know many of us become friends with members of the associations if we're working with them for a particularly long period of time, or if we have a committee that we're in charge of, and that's part of our community. And then your colleagues, the people that serve on the staff with you. And then finally, yourself.
I'm particularly interested in the advocating for yourself piece. I find myself don't know how to do this. Talking about me is not a nature to me. And I talk about this in a lot of awards judging process. If I am these people, I don't even know how I could put myself out there in that sense. So where should we start with that?
Well, I think you raise a good point. I think we need to talk about self with ourselves, right? There's a specific kind of way that we want to talk about ourselves. And if anybody out there has the magic formula, please let me know. But I don't think I have it either. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I've been told by the same number of people I undersell myself or I oversell myself. And that sweet spot of just telling your story becomes challenging because for yourself, you're not exactly sure how to tell it. And then that translates into things like saying yes to things you don't want to say yes to, not being able to say no, not creating boundaries. On the positive side, being able to create appropriate boundaries with your work. If you say yes to everything, you're going to be working 100 hours a week. There has to be a boundary where you're like, no, I worked 60 hours last week. I need to work a 40-hour week this week, or whatever the boundary is. And those are somewhat easier than some other boundaries. Like when people ask me to volunteer for a position, I'm usually like so flattered that I say yes without even thinking about it. And then all of a sudden, like I said at the beginning, I have 6 volunteer jobs right now. They're like coming up on the amount of time that I spend working for my clients. And being able to say no in those situations, I think is really hard for most people. And I agree with you. I have also done some judging recently, and I look at those applications and I'm like, wow. And then I remember even like last year, I looked at one and I went, wait, I've done that and I've never talked about it. And sometimes judging is a really good way for you to learn how to advocate for yourself, right? I remember this very specifically when I was on ASE's Communication Council section. The year before, I was on as education sub chair, which is submitting sessions to ASE conferences. And at that time, 10 so years ago, they had like 5 or 6 conferences. The people before me on that committee submitted 7 and got none accepted. The year I was in, we submitted 18. So almost 3 times what they submitted the year before.
Wow.
Submissions take time. I wasn't submitting on behalf of me. We were submitting on behalf of other people from the committee. And we had 11 out of 18 accepted.
Whoa, nice.
So I feel like when you advocate for other people, it's just good karma, good juju that you put out in the world, because that's a good example of advocating for other people, right? I certainly wasn't doing 18 sessions. It wasn't about me at all. I knew people that had really strong communication skills in a lot of different areas. And I kind of tapped them and said, would you be interested in submitting through the communication section? And I feel like we in the association community, much more so than other communities, advocate for each other and for one another. And it is more difficult with that kind of giver mentality to think about yourself and the ways that you've given back to the community. And that's what I struggle with in advocating for ourselves and talking about ourselves in a way that strikes that line between braggart and too humble.
Hmm. I mean, from for myself, it comes from my upbringing and culture. I was taught to be very humble, to keep my head down, to do the work, and then the result will talk for themselves. But I cannot expect potential employers to know that. And that's why I find it so hard to find that sweet spot of telling my stories using your word. Like the other day, I was looking at my applications and all this such an imposter syndrome. I didn't even believe that it was me on a piece of paper. And on another versions, I just really put down every single thing that's happening under the sun. So yeah, if anyone has that formula, we'd love to know to find that sweet spot to tell our story properly.
I also think it tends to be more prominent with women. There are some studies that have been done that if a man looks at a job application and there are 10 things that they want that applicant to have, and he has 2, he's going to apply and then be shocked that he didn't get it. Vice versa, when a woman applies for a job and there are 10 things on the application and she has 8 or 9 of them and she doesn't have one, she's like, oh, I don't think I can apply. I
Yeah.
don't have that one. I've literally had friends say that to me, that I'm not going to apply. I go, you are going to apply. If you have 50% of what they're looking for, it's worth a shot. And sometimes in job applications, they say, oh, that's not a good fit, but we have this other position that we think is going to come open, we'd like to consider you for that. You just don't know. Culturally, I can understand from your perspective, but I think just even as women in general, we don't tend to tell our stories, sing our praises for ourselves as much as
Mm.
we could. I just came from the women's exchange last week from ASAE, and
All that.
there was a hashtag in the exchange called Say the Thing. And it was really about advocating for yourself, advocating for other people. And this is like an amazing little side story. They were talking about mentorship versus sponsorship. So, mentorship is when you're mentoring someone and you're helping them into their next career position. Maybe you're looking at their resume, very practical. Mentorship is then taking that a step further. And those are people who are going to advocate for you when you aren't in the room. And
Mm.
I had a really good example of that. So when they asked for somebody from the audience to talk about what do you think sponsorship is, I raised my hand and there was someone sitting in the room who had been a sponsor to me. And I was able to, and I said at the end of my, it's really somebody advocating for you when you're not in the room. And there's that word again, advocating, right? And I said, I want to give a shout out to this person. And she literally, her eyes filled up with tears, and she was sitting a
Aw.
couple tables away from me. So she said, thank you. And then she came over to me to thank me on a break. I think like when someone advocates for you, that thank you is so necessary and deserved. And by the way, if that opportunity had not occurred, I had sent her a gift card just for singing my praises when I wasn't there. And again, I think a thank you note, a gift card, if you know that somebody is advocating for you, is your mentor, your sponsor in that room when you're not in that room, you need to thank them,
Mm.
because people do it from the heart, and you want them to know from your heart how appreciative you are and how grateful you are that they did that for you. Even if you don't get the gig, you should definitely say, at a minimum, you should send them an email or text that
Yeah.
says, "Oh,"
Yeah.
right? But I try to go a little further because I don't think anybody does that. So.
That sounds really nice. That sounds lovely.
And it's also part of why I love this community. I think we do advocate for one another. I think we do go further and help each other. I can't tell you, especially during COVID, how many first time conversations I had with people who were thinking about being consultants.
Mm.
How do I schedule my day? How do I get new business? How do I write a contract? And I had these one-on-one conversations. I'm still having them today, a little less, but a lot during COVID. And I'm happy to help.
That's awesome. So again, go back to our broader theme of advocate. I'm hearing a lot about advocating for yourself and advocating for others. Are you able to dig deep into one at a time? I'm sensing that advocating for others is easier to do. So let's start with that first.
Yeah. So
Um,
that's the community piece. We talked culture and then community and then self.
nice.
So the community piece, I see those as, like I said, three concentric circles or levels. The community piece is really important, I think, especially in the association community. I remember I was on a phone call and it was during COVID. It was a consulting call, and there were like two or three of us on the call before the call actually started. And someone on the call was saying, I really need clients. I just went out on my own. And so there were a few of other consultants on the call. And someone piped up, was not me, and said, we all need clients. I mean, why? Why are you asking this community to help you without, there needs to be quid pro quo, right? And I feel that that's the exception in this community. I really feel like if you help somebody, they're willing to help you. It's
Mm.
very different than the corporate sort of dog eat dog world that I was in when I worked for Catchum, because we had mostly corporate clients. I had a few big association clients, and I kind of feel like very, very big associations who can afford a big PR firm, they kind of function like corporations. You have
Yeah.
a 400-person staff, 500-person staff. You're kind of like a corporation. Everybody's got their silos that they're working in. You have a lot of money that's passing through. So you kind of are working more like a corporation. I mean, my sweet spot clients are mid to small size. I've even worked with clients that they just have a board. They don't even have any staff,
Mm.
paid staff there.
Yep.
So I really feel like that from working with those associations, the mid-size, smaller associations, you really do get that sense of community. Just, when I have a client that I've worked successfully for, I'll go back and ask them to write a testimonial. And I've never had anybody turn me down. And I think that's, again, a testament to the community. I think there's so many different ways to advocate in the community, right? So you can volunteer for an ASE committee or section. You can also be like an unofficial mentor. I've been watching like the DELP program and pulling people in to presentations from that program
Nice.
who have not had a lot of speaking engagement experience. DELP scholars and also young professionals. If you're in your 20s and you're in your first job, chances are you haven't had a chance to speak in a national audience. And I've been doing that for more than 10 years, before it was in vogue or popular. So,
That's
but I
awesome.
think that's another way to advocate. You can advocate formally, like ASE's mentor program through the Young Professionals Group, which I'm part of. But then you can also advocate unofficially. And sometimes those unofficial connections are the ones that really become meaningful relationships. I have one with a young woman who was on a committee with me probably about 10 years ago. And I was looking for somebody to speak with me at Great Ideas. Someone backed out like right at the start. So I asked this person if they would be interested in speaking on a national stage. It was in Orlando. They had to travel and all. And they said yes. And then they were in my room the night before the session because they were nervous. It wasn't that the person couldn't do it. It was just that they were really nervous about, well, I don't know if I can do all this. And so we just worked through it. And it was all about getting them to realize that it really was about the confidence level that you walk into the room with. And the post of that story is that we had a heckler in the room.
Oh
I'm
no.
like, "Who is a heckler in an ASA conference?" Person took every opportunity, "Wait, I have an objection to that." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" And I was kept validating because you validate and then you just sort of turn the boat around, and that's a great point. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Anybody else have and just kind of keep going. So she got up and the heckler kept heckling
Wow.
and she did a really good job the first time, and I didn't want to interrupt because I felt like she can handle this. She saw me do it. She could model after me. And the second time the person went to heckle her, it was very funny. She like turned around and looked over her shoulder, and I was standing behind her. And I realized that was like a cry for, I need some help here. And then I was happy to step up. And again, I kind of validated his point, thanked him for his comment, and then moved on. And there was an ASA staffer in the room. They said, "Oh my God, I don't know how you handled that," and just moved on because the guy was like relentlessly coming
Wow.
at us. It was really weird. And ironically, he left the room after I bailed her out. And I think even in that scenario, I was an advocate for her, right? Because I didn't want to step on her toes. I didn't want to go up if she didn't need my help. But her turning around and giving me, oh my God, like, I don't know what to do. I was able then to step up. So in these very small ways, you can be an advocate for in your community for others, people on your staff, people on your team, just colleagues at work, members that might have themselves in hot water over a statement. There's so many different ways that you can advocate on a very small daily kind of basis. I like to call it the bank of karma, right? We don't necessarily get back, from that incident, but there's like a bank, and
Hmm.
all of this goodwill goes into the bank and it comes back at you in other ways.
Yeah. That's really cool. And in that particular story, I appreciate how you give space for others to handle the situation, and you are also very alert and pay attention so that as soon as they need your help, you step in promptly as well. So thank you for sharing that stories. Now,
It's really interesting to be an advocate in that role because it is that sweet spot, right? Like we were talking about, how do you talk about yourself and not seem like you're bragging or not be immodest or too humble? And it's the same kind of sweet spot. Where do you step in? And that's where the skill of advocating does require some emotional intelligence
yeah,
to be able to do that in the right way. So thank you for recognizing that.
and thank you for pointing out the emotional intelligence piece in there. If we want to start building up our advocate muscles, what's the one thing that we should start looking at or start practicing?
Well, the word that comes to mind in terms of when is the right time to do this is being empathetic
Mm,
and compassionate to someone else, right? So, for example, it happens in cases where we don't even think that's the case. In my very first director job, I did a good job on something, and the deputy executive director was in front of the staff congratulating me. And I immediately turned to my team and I said, it was a team effort. So I want to thank my team. I want to share this accolades with my team. And that was advocating for my team. And ironically, the deputy executive director said, "Oh, that's really interesting that you would turn around and share that credit, like there was something wrong
Wow.
with it." And I really feel that's a key leadership trait, right? That ability to be able to share the credit, to point things out when they're not going well, and help people to achieve their best quality. When I was working for association, I had a team underneath of me. I felt it was my goal as the director of department to figure out what the strengths were of the individual I was working with. And there's a job description, but they might not be able to do all the roles in the job, but they might be good at these three other roles. So then I had to shuffle around. Let's give these 10 tasks to this person. I'm not going to give these three. I'm going to give that to person B because they're stronger in that area. So you kind of have to shuffle around based on the people that you have working with you. That's really being an advocate and a leader for your team. And that's kind of how I see the word advocate being used. So the three things I think you need to have is a mind of leadership, emotional intelligence that creates empathy and compassion for others, and an extension of that, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. If this was said to me, how would this make me feel?
I really like this. You make it really clear. I also want to acknowledge the example that you just shared now about sharing the credit. And I think it's not only that we share the credit with the team, but it's also acknowledging that the entire team has done a great work. And I
Right.
don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm also a firm believer of understanding the people that we work with, understanding the strengths of our staff, and maximize on their strengths and their likes so that they enjoy the work, then they'll deliver greater outcomes for the organization. That's a really good approach to managing the team as well.
Yeah, I also feel like I advocate in a different way. When I lost my dad, it was like a odd time of the year. I wanted to belong to a support grief group. It was an odd time of the year and I couldn't get in for like 3 to 6 months. So I wound up doing one-on-one counseling with a group in Northern Virginia that provides free grief and bereavement counseling. They're all volunteers, no one gets paid. And I decided when I went through that process, I wanted to give back. I'm kind of bringing this up because Father's Day was yesterday and was my dad's loss that brought me to that center. So a couple years later, I actually trained to be a grief support volunteer. And that I'm doing that work today. I talk to people one on one. I'm trying to normalize grief and everything. But that also is advocating in a very different way for people. And it's a little bit self healing as well, because as I'm helping people through this process, it's helping me to help them. So being an advocate and paying it forward also has a residual benefit for people. And I think those of us in the association community, we get that. And we get that in spades. And we're not afraid to stand up at a meeting and say, so and so was my sponsor, or thank you to the rest of my staff because I couldn't have done it without you as a team. I think we as association professionals have that gift of innate empathy and compassion, and we can put ourselves in other people's shoes.
Can I ask you to share a story of how this experience helped you to advocating for others at the same time as self-healing process?
Yes. So my role as a grief support volunteer, I answer phones for 3 hours a week. They ring like once or twice. And then also I have a client that I speak to once a week. And they're in different stages of grief. Sometimes people have just lost their loved one, and it could be a son or a daughter or a spouse, or it could be a parent or a sibling. I've talked to people all over the map in terms of who they lost. It's usually a primary a family member. And as I'm helping them through the grief process, it kind of brings up all these emotions that I had through the grief process. And as we know from the little bit that's in the lexicon in society about grief, you don't really heal. It doesn't go away. It doesn't end. It's just like a kind of a hole in your heart, and you learn to like live around the hole, but the hole really never goes away. It does get a little bit smaller. It never really goes away. So, in helping somebody else trying to cope with their grief, I'm kind of reminding myself with my own words, oh, on my tough days, there's still tough days, it's been 8 years, you know, these are some things I could do, right? It's not just helping them. And then that back and forth story has helped me realize, and then in turn, I can help them. I've been doing it like 3 years. I graduated right before COVID, so we didn't do anything for a year. And then I waited a little while to get clients. So I've had like 10 clients. I kind of feel no matter where the people are in their process, I can tap into what I went through and then share that with them and help them, give them very practical tips to get through the day when they're like hit with that wave of grief. And so, in a way, I'm advocating for them. But one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I really feel like it helps me in my own healing process. So, there's like a give and a take. It's the same when you look at a parent child relationship. You hear this all the time that the parents think they're giving the children, but so many times they'll say, my child has taught me so much about
Mm.
myself. And teachers, the same kind of thing. I know I taught religious school for a number of years and I would go in and say, I'm the teacher, but you learn so much from the kids, right? So I feel like it's the same kind of relationship where as a bereavement volunteer, I learn so much from the people that I'm helping that ultimately helps me too. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
Thank you for sharing that. So, if our audience like to know more about this support group, how can they find out more this
Um,
group?
First of all, it's free. So I do want to stress that. And because of COVID, we now can actually help people nationally. Before it was just meeting at the place in Northern Virginia. But if you're in Chicago, they will help you in Chicago. They do it now by Zoom or by phone. So it doesn't have to be in person. And the center is called Haven of Northern Virginia. And if you type that into Google, it'll come up and you can call them or email them and tell them about your loss. And the nice thing about it is you're talking to a virtual stranger, somewhat like therapy, and you feel open to share more of yourself and your story and whatever because it isn't someone you know. So a lot of times if my association friends will come to me and say, I'd like to learn more about that, I make it very clear I can't be your your volunteer because I want you to get the full experience and I don't want you to hold back about any of your family dynamics or anything that's super personal that you wouldn't necessarily want a work colleague to know about. So, yeah, it's been a really gratifying thing. The number one thing, and I didn't think this at all when I started, the number one thing I've gotten out of it is people are generally looking for someone to normalize their grief process.
Mm.
And I would say there is a normalization, and we don't ever hear about that because people don't want to talk about grief, but there is a process. It's very normal that people go through. And part of my role with various clients, I'll say like a million times, that's totally normal. Those feelings are totally normal. That action was totally normal. This is part of the grief process.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was going through it, it made me feel like, oh God, I'm not crazy. I don't need to be medicated. So, yeah, I think it's good.
Thank you for sharing that experience with us. We are moving to the last part of the episode very soon. Is there any other story or example about advocate that you'd like to share?
I would like to say to all my association executive friends and those of us who work in the community, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. And I think one way of doing that is to almost feel like you're applying for an award or some kind of job where you have to list all of your accomplishments job wise and volunteer wise, because I know a lot of us in the association community volunteer in other capacities as well. And anytime that you feel like you can't, you feel like downtrodden, like you just feel like, oh gosh, I'm never going to get that promotion, or I'm never, take that piece of paper out and look at all the accomplishments that you've achieved, because we've all achieved some. And I think it'll raise your spirits. And that's really you advocating for you by you, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't even have to be public. And I also feel that, like affirmations, when you make that list of all your accomplishments, I'm talking about the tiniest little accomplishments. When you make that list of all your accomplishments, it becomes part of the way you think. And it kind of imparts that into your brain so that when you're in a conversation with someone and you're like, oh, yeah, I did this for this, you're telling a story about a role you had. And it doesn't come off as being bragging, and it doesn't come off as being immodest. It just comes off as you sharing a story. And I think by writing down all of those accomplishments, they become things that you can draw from like this in a conversation.
Yeah. You reminded me, I actually have a friend who does that. They keep a journal of all of their accomplishments, like everything under the sun. And now you reminded me that it is a good way to advocating for yourself. It's a good reminder of all the things that we've done and give us that boost of confidence so that we can talk about the relevant things that we have achieved and accomplished.
I do have one last thing to add. So, in terms of community, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I'm the incoming chair as of August of ASE's Research Foundation's Development Committee. So, we're the people that ask people for money. So, everyone runs when they see me coming at a reception. They were looking for Marcom people. And I was kind of like, why would they be looking for Marcom people? I haven't used Marcom skills in this arena. Maybe I'll apply. So that's what I did. And then I wound up writing the messaging and all of the scripting for Giving Tuesday last year. And I'm speaking about how I use those Marcom skills to advocate for the development committee for the Research Foundation to raise money for Giving Tuesday. So shameless plug, anyone who wants to attend, I'd love to see you at my session.
Nice. Is this a reception in Cleveland that you're referring to?
Yeah, it's on the 11th at 1:15. So it's
Okay.
an express, it's a half-hour session, and we're going to start out with a wrap about development. We'll see how that goes. I have 2 audience warmer-uppers.
Okay, nice. We'll put that in the show
I don't
notes,
have
the
music, so
link.
they're going to be like,
Okay, we look forward to that. What's next for you in the coming 12 months?
So I will be the chair as of August of the development committee. That has me a little worried because we had a super successful Giving Tuesday. And I remember calling the ASA staff person, oh my God, what are we going to do next year when I'm chair? And she was like, yeah, that did cross my mind. We're going to try to do as much as we can to up the numbers yet again. I don't think we're going to have an issue with the classic this year. And that's another way that ASA raises money for the Research Foundation because it's at the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so I think it's going to sell out. I'm always looking for associations that need my help, either in a one-time conversational kind of way. I always offer when I meet people, if you ever have a Marcom problem and it's a 15-minute, 20-minute discussion, feel free to reach out to me. And no one has ever done it. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but if somebody offered that to me, I would take them up on it because it's sincere. I feel like at this point in my career, I have the ability to give back and I want to be able to do that. And I feel lucky that I'm in a position to be able to do that, both with knowledge and time. And so that's what I look most forward to. And then being able to give back to the association community in that mentoring, sponsorship kind of way, continuing to do that, because I think that's super important. And I want to lift younger people up and people that maybe haven't had the opportunities that I've had.
That's awesome. So say if our association executive colleague like to get in touch with you for that 15 minutes conversation, how do they get in touch with you?
So you can text me and my phone number is 703-346-71. And then the other way they can get in touch with me is email, and it's sheri@singercom.com. So that's SHERI at SINGERCOMM.com.
Okay, I'll make sure I put them in the show notes.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm happy to talk to anyone. Summertime is usually a little slower, especially like June, July for us as association executives. I've found August tends to pick up a little bit more because people are gearing up for the fall. So this is a good time.
Nice. Okay, last question of the episode. And I hope you have fun with this question. So if you were going to your dream vacation tomorrow, what is the one item that you must pack with you and why?
Oh, this is going to be so. Let me think about this for just a second. So the one item that I have to pack with me, and I was in Portugal in March and I had a client that had a big issue blow up while I was there. I did get the international phone plan. I saw that my business partner called me and I texted her back and I said, "Did you just butt dial me?" She's like, "No, we have a problem. You need to talk to me." And I was like, and I was able to resolve it in 10 minutes. So my phone, I hate to say
Okay.
that, my phone. And then the other thing that I would tell people, this is a game changer for me. So I go on these week-long, very quick-paced vacations, doing one in Canada in July. And I just got packing cubes, not compression packing cubes, but regular packing cubes. They were game changers for me. Just to know, okay, this is where all my pants are. This is where all my shirts are.
Yeah.
It's a game changer.
Compartmentalize our life for the coming days. Yes.
Yeah.
Game changer. Thanks so much for sharing that. And this is the end of the episode. Thank you again for your time and sharing your story with me and my listeners.
My name is Sheri Singer, and you're listening to Humans of Authenticity.